Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to episode 4 of the Standing on Business podcast. I'm Mark Mausner here with my guest Ahmed. And today we're going to talk about our entrepreneurial journeys and how we can help you get rich, get free from the 9 to 5 grind, and become a better person. So Ahmed, we've known each other since 2010?
Yeah.
Freshman year of high school?
Yeah.
Was it Spanish class?
It was Spanish class, and I remember you sat all the way in the front, and I sat in the back. And all those years, all I really wanted was just for you to give me some attention.
Well, you got it now, bro. You got it now. So, obviously, I wanted you on the podcast because you're one of the most intelligent people I know, both IQ and EQ, but also you are an entrepreneur. Tell the audience a little bit about your business, what you do, how things got started, kind of what's your origin story? What's your hero origin story?
Sure. So I'll start with this. Lotus Fitness, that's a personal training service. I'm the founder, and I help older adults who are experiencing pain or discomfort to overcome that so that they can live the retirement of their dreams and so that they can play with their grandkids without experiencing back pain or discomfort, so that they can go for long walks with their family without feeling like they need to stop all the time because their feet or their hips hurt. And so that they can just live a life without the concerns of aging and the wear and tear on their bodies. Now, where that started was actually experiencing pain myself. And that takes me all the way back to before I even met you, because in middle school, I was like a really chubby kid. I was that guy who would like go to the beach and wear a shirt at the beach.
I was the same.
Hide behind the shirt.
Yeah.
And I remember my man boobs were just the
man boobies, bro. Oh, man.
And it was horrible, but you know, I wanted to make a change because I was going into high school. I actually wanted some confidence. I felt like I was missing that. So at the time, my cousin, he introduced me to health and fitness and wellness, and I kind of fell in love with it. And I really started going to the gym, very often. It wasn't until college, though, where it became a religious part of my life. I would go all the time, sometimes twice a day, and I was actually like doing too much. And that all culminated into this one summer night where there was like AC/DC playing in the background. It was like 1,000 square foot gym.
Was it Thunderstruck?
It might have been.
It's literally the only AC/DC song I know.
Yeah, right.
Go on.
And there was so red walls, right? I'm lifting, I'm throwing weight, and I'm catching it. And my coach at the time, he was a guy from the Marines. I had a lot of respect for him.
From the Marines?
He ran a successful business. Yeah.
Was it David Goggins? Stay hard.
He was.
Imagine.
He's awesome. He has a beautiful family. But anyway, so I was throwing the weight, I was catching it. And I hear him say, all right, one more. Throw it, I go to catch it. Right away, I feel my back to the point where I just had to like stop. And that night, I couldn't sleep because I couldn't find the comfortable place to lay down in. The next day, when I try to go and study, I try to find a comfortable position to sit in, I can't. I'm hobbling around campus, literally dragging my leg, because it's that kind of sensation that you get that goes down your leg, like that nervy sensation.
Sciatica?
Yeah,
Is that yeah.
It was so bad. It was so bad.
Very debilitating.
It was horrible. And the worst part was that I felt like I was going to lose out on exercising. And that's what had helped me gain all this confidence that I was looking for in the first place. So I needed to find a solution. And so I studying, doing my research, and I realized that exercise wasn't just about helping you look good, but it can help you feel really good.
Yes.
And that's when I started studying anatomy and biomechanics and physics, and it all culminated into, in 2019, opening up Lotus Fitness with my cousin. So most people don't know this, but I had a partner in the very beginning, and it was the same cousin who had introduced me to health and fitness. Now we had separated during COVID, and ever since then, it's been a great learning journey. And I love what I do. I love helping people so that they can live their life without the limitations of their bodies.
Amazing. I like that it's something kind of personal for you, where you had an injury, and now you've started this business in large part to help other people be healthy and to sort of avoid having that same pain or lack of mobility, and even more than that, loss of confidence and loss of community that can come with a loss of mobility and a loss of strength. In other words, I think it's really impressive. I think a lot of people start businesses because they want to make money, and there's actually nothing wrong with that. But I think also you have a mission that is very empathic and more than just about the money in terms of Lotus Fitness.
Yeah, I want to be successful in anything I do in my life, and exercise actually helped me figure that out. And what I mean by that is, if you put in the work, you can be successful. Exercise gave me self-efficacy, meaning I used to be like a very so when I lost all the weight, like in high school, at my lowest I was like 122 pounds. So I went from basically like 160 pounds to 122 pounds
Wow.
in like a year and a half-ish or something like that. And it made me realize that, oh wow, if I actually put my mind to something, if I have certain inputs, the output can be the result that I'm looking for. And so when I started doing CrossFit and I realized how many things were really hard, like throwing up weight and catching it in a snatch, or doing like these Olympic lifts, or doing a muscle up or whatever, I used to be in a place where I couldn't do it to a place where I could. And the reason for that was because I realized that it just took discipline, it took work, it took time, and it took a certain level of, I suck, and if I want to get better, I have to do X, Y, Z. I have no other choice. And so, like when you said, oh, there's nothing wrong with wanting to make money, there's nothing wrong with wanting to be successful. I mean, of course, right? And I think part of being successful in business is helping people to the highest level that you can. So for me, it is a very personal thing in terms of injuries and being able to exercise. The way that I look at it now is so these days I'm helping older adults who are experiencing pain to overcome that, so that they can have the retirement of their dreams, play with their grandkids without experiencing any sensations they don't like, so that they can keep playing pickleball, so that they can travel with their family without feeling like, they can't walk as fast and their family's going to leave them behind, and they have to stop every couple of minutes because their back hurts. Like, I see this kind of stuff with like my parents, and it's horrible. Like they go from being these people who can just live life to now they have limitations in their body. And I've experienced what it feels like to have limitations in your body, and that shit sucks.
Very difficult.
It
Very,
sucks.
yeah, huge. Yeah, I can relate because I've been an athlete for a lot of my life, but similar to you, I wasn't always into fitness. I was also kind of like a chubby kid until I was about 13, 14. Didn't like sports, made fun of it, and then got into sports and fitness and made that change as well. And I played a lot of basketball growing up, and I also experienced a lot of back problems when I was like 18, 19, it started. And it was a huge problem for me for years. And man, like, you haven't lived until you've had like chronic back pain. That is fucking a trip. Like, it's crazy how we take mobility for granted. Not even mobility, being pain-free for granted. Like, the human body's full of nerves, and when those nerves are impacted, even if it's just a 2 out of 10, but it's chronic and it's all the time, that is a special type of experience. And yeah, it's not something that you can really know or understand per se until you've lost that pain-freeness or lost that mobility. So I totally relate.
Yeah, and it makes you second guess things. So, if you see your boys playing basketball or whatever, and you want to like play with them, you actually have to think about, oh, well, what's going to happen to my back if I play with them? Can I play with them?
Yeah.
If I go to play with them, am I going to be able to perform at my highest level
Right.
because I have this back thing? Like, just having those thoughts is just living without those thoughts is better. So
Right.
I get where you're coming from, man, and I know that you work really hard on your fitness. I mean, just look.
Of course, of course I do. Let's be real. Duh. I mean,
but yeah.
yeah. But so I love reading biographies of like successful people and everything. And right now I'm reading the biography of Theodore Roosevelt, which is super random because there's a podcast called Founders by David Senra. Do you know Founders? No, it's a podcast where he reads the biographies or autobiographies of basically some of the most successful people to ever live, mostly business founders and everything. And I've listened to the the Arnold Schwarzenegger episodes literally hundreds of times because as people know, that's my idol, one of my idols. And I was listening to one of the Arnold Schwarzenegger episodes while I was at the gym, and the episode ended, and it moved on to the next episode. And it happened to be an episode about Theodore Roosevelt. And I was just giving it a chance, and I was like, oh, wait, I really love some of his mindsets or ways of looking at life. And Theodore Roosevelt didn't have back pain, but when he was growing up, he had asthma. Really, really bad asthma. Oh. And he was growing up in like he lived about 1860 to about the 1920s or so.
He grew up in Oyster Bay.
That's right. Yeah, New York. So Theodore Roosevelt struggled a lot with asthma growing up, and he struggled with it really his whole life, but particularly when he was a kid. And it's something that motivated him his whole life in several ways. One was it just put a chip on his shoulder. He was kind of known as like he was known as like as an invalid. Like child illness, pediatric illness was a lot more common back then in the 1860s because they just didn't have nearly the level of medicine we do today. So he had this invalidism where he was just sick all the time, and he was sort of a weak kid and would get bullied and wasn't as strong as his big brother or whatever. So that put a big chip on his shoulder to be a high performer and be a type A person, and that was a chip on his shoulder his whole life. I also use like my back pain and things that I've struggled with in the past in that same way as fuel. You know what I mean? Because when things happen to you in life, you can either use it as fuel or you can let it beat you down, and you might as well just use it as fuel to push you to do further things. And then the other way he framed it as something that really helped him in his life was, again, he was this invalid child as a kid, not very strong, not very physically adept. And he also came from a very wealthy family, very wealthy class, and was sort of looked down upon in a way from some other folks he encountered in his early life as like a privileged person. So this view from others of him as this invalid, this privileged person, really pissed him off, and he, for his entire life, pursued what he called the strenuous life. I'm not this invalid, I'm not this privileged person, I'm going to purposefully pursue a life of difficulty. And he did this throughout his whole life, purposely pursuing physical tests. Like he went out to the American West and rode horses and just did all this like very physically strenuous stuff, but then also pushed himself tremendously in terms of he wrote like 8 books by the time he was like 20-something years old. He pushed himself academically, pushed himself career-wise, and of course, he eventually literally became the president of the United States. Yeah. So the point of all this being using these early life bumps in the road as fuel, as putting a chip on my shoulder, and purposefully leaning into also a strenuous life as opposed to a life of like weakness, or which a lot of people do nowadays. It's so easy to live whatever the opposite of a strenuous life is, with video games and high foods, high in sugar and high in fat, social media, porn, and all these different things, that it's so easy to live the life of whatever the opposite of a strenuous life is. Yeah. And so purposely leaning into
somebody who's
a life that's difficult.
Comfort, because when you say strenuous life, it hit a chord in me in terms of, sometimes I feel like I purposefully take the hard way, and there are parts of me that appreciate that about myself, and there are other parts of me that are like, why don't you just take the way that's going to get you successful faster? And I'm generally between this tug of war where I'm like, okay, but if I do it the hard way, I'm going to build all of these skills, I'm going to build all of this grit, I'm going to build all of these character traits that when I do take the easy way, it's going to help me grow in a way that I couldn't even imagine. And it's in little things. And I'm just like speaking out loud here. I'm not sure if there's a right way or wrong way to think about it, but like at times it even stopped me from using things like AI and technology. You know? Mm-hmm. So even to that degree, it's like, I want a strenuous life. And I'm not sure exactly where the line is between a smart, strenuous life and a strenuous life that's just strenuous for strenuous sake.
Right, like almost like diminishing returns on like pursuing
the level of
that, you know,
strain on yeah, man.
I could totally see that. I just love the idea of a strenuous life. And I think the way that it manifests in my life is like I take freezing cold showers almost every morning, and I love it now. I absolutely love it. I love pushing myself hard in the gym. I've even, and I'm sure you have as well, someone who works really hard. When you're in the gym and you're working really hard, you're reaching failure, you're pushing yourself so that your body can grow. I've felt the same thing many, many times cognitively, where I'm working hours and hours at a time. I'm doing deep work blocks, an hour and a half of, or more of completely unfocused, Freudian slip, completely undistracted work.
Sure.
And I can feel where I'm getting to a point where my brain, similar to my muscles in the gym, are like, can we stop? Can we take a break? Like I'm struggling. My brain is almost telling me like I'm struggling to continue to focus here and do all this cognitive work. Can we please take a break? And I keep pushing anyway, because the same way for my muscles, I'm trying to get my brain to be able to do that for longer periods of time. And it works. So yeah, just turning something that's difficult and strenuous into something that is actually enjoyable. And I'm pushing myself for that reason, to get that gain on the other end.
Yeah, and I've made a habit of using the brain being like, all right, stop now, as a signal to push.
Yes.
Because I think the GOAT, Cristiano Ronaldo. I think it was him who said, actually scratch that. I think it was like Muhammad Ali. He was like, oh yeah, I don't actually start counting my crunches until they start to hurt.
Mm-hmm.
It's
yeah, that was
Ronaldo
Muhammad Ali.
or Muhammad Ali.
Yeah.
You know?
Maybe both.
Maybe
but
both.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah.
They're both ripped. Anyway, so yeah, it's interesting, man. I know you're one of those people who like pushes themselves.
Absolutely.
And I feel like that's one of the reasons why I love you so much, bro. It's
love you too,
just
bro.
like I know that you're going to continue to get better and better and better.
Mm-hmm.
And life is so short, and if you're not getting better, then like, why are you spending time in the world? Like,
Yeah.
what are you doing?
Like, what are you doing?
And for those of you who might be offended by that, sorry, not sorry.
Good.
Yeah.
Be offended.
It's just like,
Get better.
because I want you to get better for you, for your life. It's not about what we're doing and where we want to go in our ambitions, because I know that you're a very ambitious person. But for people who maybe where like ambition is not important to them, but at least like get to a place where you can just enjoy life better. Mm-hmm. If you want to be in a place where you're playing video games all day, like fine, but try to be the best at playing video games. You know,
Right.
like why not?
Yeah.
I don't know.
The reason I started this podcast is because I talked about on a previous episode where I did monk mode for a while, which I actually heard of that concept first from you. Yeah. I remember, for some reason, it was like fall. Maybe this was like fall 2022. I just remember you being like, saying something like, yeah, like September, October, November, or you said like 3 months in that range of like late summer, early fall, I'm just disappearing. And I'm working and I'm grinding, and the purpose is to make huge strides in my career and everything in a short period of time. And I ended up doing the same thing. And on that journey, which Alex Hormozy likes to call your Rocky cutscene, which is a reference to the movie Rocky, where he's training to fight. And it's this music cutscene or music sort of compilation where he's being shown running up the stairs in Philadelphia, and he's running around. He's like punching like the meat or whatever he's training. And the Rocky cutscene in business, when you're starting, especially as a first-time entrepreneur, is very difficult because you're doing all this work. You don't know if it's going to work out. And the crazy thing is, the Rocky cutscene in the movie is 5 minutes or 3 minutes or whatever. Maybe it's a minute long. In real life, it could be 3 years, 5 years, And the reason that I'm starting this podcast more than anything is for those who are in that Rocky cutscene and you don't know if it's going to work out, and you're kind of like looking up at the sky and you're like, is this going to work out? Is this the right thing to do? The reason I wanted to start this podcast is so that people know that you're not alone. Like, nope. I was there. I'm definitely still there in a bit, but I'm definitely like better off than I was when I was originally doing that monk mode. And I was like, okay, I literally don't even have a client yet. I don't know what's going to happen. In theory, I could lose my job and like not have money, and it was very tenuous there. Now it's in a better place, thank goodness, but it's still early days. I want to inspire those people to not give up, know that they're not alone, and that it's normal to be in that rocky cutscene. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and there were times, more than I can count, where I've had those thoughts. Am I on the right path? Should I keep doing this? And those thoughts, they're really hard to deal with, especially when they're being accentuated by the people around you. And if you're an entrepreneur and you're trying to succeed in a way that's different than most people, that may happen to you. But I think having the self-belief is so important. And being almost stubborn with your self-belief. Understanding that I'm just going to keep doing the work anyway, and I'm just going to keep going. And if it doesn't happen, at least on the other side of that, I'll be proud that I put in the work. That's all I want. I just want to know that, like, at the end of the day, that I have no regrets.
Yes.
Because that part of me where if I feel like at the end I didn't put my best foot forward, that's going to be really hard for me to handle.
Yes.
But if at the end, maybe my business isn't where I wanted it to go, but I can still look myself in the mirror and be like, you know what? You gave that a good effort. Then that to me is success. And it's never actually failure because you'll have learned along the way. When I first started, I didn't even know what I didn't know. Like, it's so funny. Like, I actually remember in my cousin, so again, my cousin and I started the business together. And I remember we were in his apartment at the time in Astoria. And it was like summer. It was like hot inside. They really care about the environment there, so they didn't have the AC on, those guys. Anyway, so we were looking at like basically spreadsheets of how we wanted the business to go. And the way that we like ran the numbers and projected revenue, like when I look back at it now, it's like we were like babies living in an imaginary world where business is this very easy thing that like you just go like that and your business skyrockets, but it's not that. It's you have to change who you are as a person. You have to battle all of the limiting beliefs that are stopping you from being where you want to be. You have to have conversations that you never thought you could have. You have to reflect, and you have to have the self-awareness that you've never had before, because the only person that's going to drive you to success or failure is yourself.
Yeah.
And you have to just take that on the chin.
Yeah, one thing I've noticed about business is, like, I went to business school, right? I got an MBA. Honestly, completely useless. Like, there are very few things that I learned in the course of that degree that actually have helped me in my business career. You know what's actually helped me? Doing stuff, seeing the results, making a bunch of mistakes, being that baby in an imaginary world, which fucking still am. No, like, definitely have been there in that stage where not even knowing what I don't know, iterating, learning, and there's so much stuff that I've learned running this business that you only can learn by being out in the field. They're just such niche, edge case, little lessons that you would never learn in a classroom, because the amount of time it would take to teach you all of those things would be way too much time, and it would be far too esoteric. All these little lessons, because they're not necessarily all related, but put together, you have to know them in order to run a business. Like, I want to try to think of an example. Okay, I'll give you an example, right? So with a client, I had an issue where we built a logo for them, for my digital marketing agency. For those who don't know, we're a digital marketing agency in the medical niche in New York City. Built a logo, built a whole style guide for them because they were rebranding. So new logo, we're using new colors, we're using new font. We are building new marketing materials based on this whole rebrand. And went back and forth on it over and over with them. And they approved the logo and the redesign, only for them to come back and say, actually, we don't really like the logo. After months, like a month and a half of work, a lot of back and forth, we actually don't like the logo, we actually don't like the colors. So at first I'm like freaking out. I'm like, oh my goodness, we spent all this time doing this. Turns out, most of the work is done in terms of the marketing materials. It will be a little bit of a pain in the behind to redo the logo and the colors, but all is not lost.
Sure.
And I learned, okay, going forward, when you have a client, we need to have a system where we do what are called creative briefs. We're going to have a system, we're going to have a form, it's a template, and whenever there's a logo request or some sort of redesign or marketing material, we send it to the client. Please fill this out with exactly what you think you want this to look like, and we will do our best to meet that. And then once it's approved, like do not approve it until you really ask all your employees, ask your husband, ask your wife, ask whoever, and then approve it. Don't approve it first and then come back. And if you do approve it and then there are changes after, there will be a fee. And I never would have learned that pretty niche yet very important learning in business school. The only way I could have learned it is by being out in the field and kind of making that mistake of not having that creative brief in the first place. So,
Yeah, bro.
yeah, that's the only way to not be that baby anymore is to just go out and make those mistakes. And I think a lot of would-be entrepreneurs, wannabe entrepreneurs make that mistake of, I'm not going to start a business because I don't know how. You learn how by starting the business.
Exactly.
You know?
And you have to love those mistakes because ultimately, any successful person ever, what do? They take the mistakes, they take the failures, they try to understand what the reasons were for them, and then they make changes based off of that. So I love that, man, because business it's so funny because it's you always have this kind of love-hate relationship with it in a way.
Absolutely.
Where it's you love it because it's your baby, and at the same time you're working really hard to feed your baby, but at the same time that baby
cries a lot.
Exactly, and it's waking you up in the middle of the night, and you're like, oh my god, baby, yeah, shut up.
You're like, please shut up, I need to sleep, leave me alone, why are you so needy?
Exactly. But
you love it.
But you love it anyway.
You love that baby. And
you love it anyway.
if and when it grows up to be an adult,
yes,
that's the goal.
You look back
That's
at
the
all
ultimate
those
goal.
years of when the baby was crying, and you're like, well, you know what, it was worth it.
It was all worth it.
Yeah.
I saw a video of Michael Bloomberg, one of the richest men in the world, and he said something that surprised me, which was you will never have more fun than the first I heard that it takes 7 years on average to sell a business from inception to it being sold.
Okay.
That's an average, so obviously it could take more or less. And basically he was saying, you'll never have more fun than those first 7 years where you're doing everything. You're the one who you're showing up, you're cleaning the floors, you're plugging in the coffee pot and making sure the coffee's ready for all the employees and everything. I saw another video. It was the founder of Caviar, which is a business which is similar, is essentially Uber Eats. And early on, and he ended up selling this business for $100 million, crushed it. And early on, he was doing everything. He was taking the calls, doing the sales, doing the marketing, building the website, doing all the outreach. He was a courier himself. He was going out and doing the food deliveries. Can you imagine? This guy who ends up having a 9-figure exit was delivering sushi for his business. And that made me feel really good because, again, early on, rocky cutscene, I'm not sure, am I doing the right thing? Is this going to work out? It actually is normal to be wearing all the hats, not being sure, is this going to work, doing that early on, and to see someone who had a 9-figure exit, sold it for 100 mil, he was delivering sushi, okay, good. We actually are in the right place for now, and hopefully trying to enjoy that journey while it's happening, because a lot of entrepreneurs look back and say, that actually was the most fun part. So.
And there's a beauty to it because you learn all of the parts and all the pieces in the business that you need to be aware of, right? Because say for example, that guy, then he has employees. Well then, I'm sure he did. He knows what the couriers are going through.
Yes.
And so he can create a system for them where he's going to keep them for longer. He's going to retain more of them because he's actually been there. So he knows what's going to be good for them, what's not going to be good for them. And so all these things, they end up adding up. Even when you're doing them and you're like, wow, this sucks, they all add up to actually benefit you. But I want to go back a little bit to when you were talking about the little things, folks, the minutia that you don't even know that
yes.
you would
That's
think
the
about.
right word for it. I was kind of looking for the right word, minutia, yeah.
Yeah. So I remember, when I had the brick and mortar facility, a couple of things that I didn't realize was, I'll give you an example. So the place next to us was a Kumon. Like literally, like there's a wall in between the gym and there's a kumon.
Yeah.
And, in the gym, when we had clients, we would want to play music, but we didn't realize that loud music is they're going to hear it in the kumon. So we didn't actually study the idea of, well, what's going to happen if we play music loudly here. And what ended up happening was we had to like lower the music. We couldn't play it as loud as we wanted to. Another example, behind us on the other side was a buffet. It was some sort of like Chinese buffet thing. And they often had cockroach problems.
Oh, damn.
So we had cockroach problems sometimes, and I have to take care of that. But you don't know to even ask this stuff, right? So, like, for example, if I was going to get another brick and mortar location, what would I do? I'd go over to the neighbors. I might even test playing loud music there and ask the neighbors, hey, do you hear it? Is this okay? Is this a problem? I might go to the kitchen next to us and be like, like, if there's a problem in the future, how might we deal with this? Like, are you going to pay for an exterminator? Like, what's going to go on? Set up expectations. But you don't know that this is something you have to deal with until you're in it, until you have those experiences that are like, wow, this sucks.
Yes, 100%.
So it's these little things, man. And I look back now and I'm like, wow, like I'm glad that happened. But at the time, seeing cockroaches run around and stuff and trying to, it just sucks.
Yeah, it's very stressful in the moment. But like anything, I think I saw, or I heard this interview of someone who works in hospice care, which is, for those who don't know, it's like end of life care for people who unfortunately have terminal illnesses and everything, making sure that they are as comfortable as possible during that time. And he was talking about how a lot of them, when they're almost on their deathbed, look back actually at the most difficult times in life as the most beautiful, the times where they were struggling and they either got through to the other end, or like you alluded to earlier, things don't always work out, life is that way, but they gave their best effort, right? It was the times that they looked back on were not the times where everything was going perfectly. In fact, those times were almost harder to remember versus the times where they struggled and they actually ended up winning, or they struggled and they put their best foot forward and could say that they did that, So I think we're still both relatively early, we're both still young.
Sure.
It's easy now to grit our teeth at the various annoyances, and that's normal, but I guarantee you there will definitely come a time where we look back and we smile at the hard times.
I mean, at the end of the day, don't just be an entrepreneur if you want to be successful. Be an entrepreneur if you want to be a better person, if you want to be a more resilient person, if you want to learn, and if you have a thirst for learning, and if you want to take ideas in your head and create your reality. That's the best part, I think, of entrepreneurship. It's you have this idea in your head, and you create and you make it happen in the real world, and then you see the fruits of your labor, and wow, that feeling is just amazing.
Yeah, there's nothing better than that. Yeah. So, get into more specifics. What is your ideal outcome, let's just say for the next 3 to 5 years of Lotus Fitness? You snap your fingers and everything goes perfectly according to plan. What does that look like for you guys?
So I have a lot of personal goals that trump my professional goals. Now, what I mean by that is family is very important to me. So there are people in my life that I want to spend more time with and do more things together with. There are a lot of great things about personal training, and the fulfillment that I get from it's what keeps me going. And at the same time, I trade my time to be able to do that. In terms of when I see somebody, they're coming down to the gym, we're working out together, and it's great. But just like with anything, there are pros and cons to that. So the pros of that are obviously that I get to see somebody moving, because the body is 3D. That for me is the best way to give people an exercise program and help them through moving their bodies and doing all of that. The thing that sometimes is a bit suboptimal is the idea that I can't spend as much time as I want to with like my parents, my girl, and all these other things.
And so, Mark of
course. And Mark, of course. And so when I look at 3 to 5 years down the line, it's one of two things: taking the business online, or doing something a little bit different where I'm still helping people to live their best lives. Now, I say that with a bit of apprehension because what's important to me is mastery within anything. And so I've been training people now for 8 years. I would still love to see myself continuing to get better as a personal trainer, as a communicator, as somebody that's helping people with their bodies. I still want to improve in that area. And at the same time, when I look at my life and where I want to be in 5 years, I mean, I'm potentially looking at having kids at that time. So I want to be around. I want to be at home. So we'll see. I have some things in mind, but for right now, I'm just thinking about how can I master my craft to the best of my abilities, and then from there, how can I then optimize for spending time with Mark.
Let's go.
Yeah.
Not his family, me. No, I love that. And that honestly is one of the big reasons I've also started a business too, was having originally graduated college, going into the workforce, and then working 40 hours a week, 9 to 5, plus travel, oftentimes more than 40 hours. One of the main things I'm trying to optimize for in running a business is actually not income so much as it is time. Having freedom of time, freedom of geography, and then obviously financial freedom as well. That's the holy trinity right there. If you can get those three, you're living like a king. You're living a very balanced, healthy life that, let's be real, I think most people are not, in large part because of this requirement, at least in most Western societies, of working full-time in person. And I also want to ask you if you could talk a little bit more about the practical aspects of putting the business online, because I think a lot of entrepreneurs listening to this might wonder about the same for their business, or maybe they haven't started one yet. Why go from brick and mortar to online? What are some of the advantages there?
Yeah, so I've had some idealistic struggles with this in terms of personal training.
Mm-hmm.
Now, do I work with clients online? Yes, but I don't unless I see them in person first, or at least for a little bit on the front end. The reason for that is because, again, everybody moves in a different way. Everybody's body is completely different, and you don't really know until you really delve deep into the way that they move. And so for me, there are a lot of online personal trainers out there. I don't know if I want to be one of those because there's something that just doesn't feel right to me about training people, especially if they have pain issues. Now, whether or not that's a limiting belief, I'm open to that being the case.
Training people online with
Yes, exactly. And so what I mean is, I may change my mind on that in the future. But for right now, to me, when it comes to personal training, it might not be something that I want to take online. Now, that being said, why would I want to take the business online? What you mentioned in terms of geographic freedom, in terms of time freedom, in terms of not trading your time for money,
Yes.
but trading a product or trading a service and being able to help more people at one time. Because, of course, I could do something like group training, but I really have a passion for helping one person at a time because I feel like I can make the biggest difference in their lives in that way. Now, online, what ends up happening is instead of being able to work maybe with everybody within a 5-mile radius of the gym and being able to help all, in a perfect world, all of those people within the 5-mile radius of that world, of the gym, well, the whole world becomes a potential match in terms of they have a problem and I can help them with a specific solution.
Right.
And so one of the things that I've heard before is when we talk to the financial freedom piece, is your income is your value times the people reached. And by your value, I don't mean like your value as a human being, individual.
Yes, that actually is what he means. Still listen on him.
Right? What I mean is the value that you offer people, of course, with whatever you're working on. So.
Right. And that's going to be, your sort of ceiling of your income, right, is the value you provide. And, of course, you ever hear, this is such like a, speaking of business school term, like TAM, total addressable market, is you can't, if you are beholden to a brick and mortar store, you're not going to get a client in Shanghai. And so therefore your TAM, the address it, that the market that you can address is geographically constricted, whereas if you have an online business, it is not.
I mean, look at the most successful companies in the world, right? Whether it's mobile or Apple.
It's mostly tech. Like the S&P 500, I know has been killing it lately, but actually, if you really look at it, it's I think they call it like the Magnificent Seven or something like that, which are the seven most valuable companies on the S&P. Most of them are tech. Alphabet, which is Google's parent company, Meta, the artist formerly known as Facebook, Apple, Tesla, I think,
Wow.
etc.
No,
So
that's a good point, but I just want to add on to that.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just that it's tech, but it's that they can reach people wherever in the world.
Yes.
Somebody in Shanghai might have an iPhone. Somebody in New York might have an iPhone. So, yeah, there's a big piece of that.
Yeah, and it really depends what you're trying to optimize for. Again, for me, I like what I do. I definitely think I help people, but I'm also optimizing for lifestyle design. I'm trying to design my life in the way that I want it, which again is freedom of time, geography, and money. And so for me, running an online business, 98%, 99% online. The only thing that I ever have to do in person is do video shoots when I'm doing social media shoots for my clients, which eventually I'm just going to outsource that, hire local videographers, and then it will be completely online in terms of my physical presence.
Sure.
And I can go to Ibiza or do whatever I want. So.
And for those of you who don't believe that that's possible for you, know that it's been done. And if it's been done, all it requires is certain behaviors, certain attitudes, certain beliefs, and then you could do it.
100%. What one person can do, another person can do. That's, speaking of limiting beliefs, what's an empowering belief, whatever the opposite of a limiting belief is other people have done it. And that's been actually a big thing in my business career. Before I started my business I knew others who were running similar online businesses who were intelligent and very driven, but I said to myself, like, they're not more intelligent or driven than I am, so I can do the same thing. And just seeing other people do it gave me that belief as well. And
I just want to say one more thing to that, because I remember, so I think it was summer of 2018. So I was still doing a lot of CrossFit at the time, and my biggest weakness in CrossFit was Olympic weightlifting. So that was doing what's called a clean and jerk, and then a snatch.
Hey yo.
Hey yo. So I ended up texting the same cousin who I've been talking about throughout this podcast, and I said, hey, like, I'm going to train at the Olympic Center in Egypt. Now, why is that significant? At the time, the silver medalist in the Olympics for Olympic weightlifting was Egyptian, and he was training at the Olympic Center in Egypt. So that's what I did. So I ended up going to the Olympic Center in Egypt, and I trained with this guy. Who's literally the number 2 human being on the planet who can do Olympic weightlifting at a very high level.
Was he insanely jacked?
He, listen, he wasn't like a big guy, but the weights that he was moving at the speed that he was moving it at was absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
His name is Mohammed Ahad, if anybody's interested. But anyway, here he is. He had won like a world championship at the time, silver medals in the Olympics, and he was just a regular human being. And I know that maybe that's like super obvious, but the point that I'm trying to outline here is anybody who's successful is just a human being. And you can get there if you do everything that we've talked about.
No, I think it's totally reasonable what you're saying. I've definitely fallen for this almost illusion of famous, wealthy, successful people, especially some of my idols that I look up to, almost falling for the illusion that they are these perfect beings and therefore some of the things that they have accomplished are unattainable. But a quote that I really like that I've heard from one of my idols, Tim Ferriss, from guests of his podcast, is something like, all of your idols are just people who have maximized one or two unique traits and are incredibly flawed, otherwise just like everyone else. It's just in their public perception on their podcast, movie, TV shows, wherever you are, books, biographies, wherever you are absorbing that content, of course they're going to shy away from that. Not always. Some people are incredibly blunt, do talk about their struggles, but it's easy to fall for that illusion of like, oh, this person is just, they're an alien. They just can do things that I can't do. Not true. They have just maximized one or two unique traits and are totally flawed elsewhere, just like everyone else.
And having those ideas top of mind in terms of maximizing their unique traits, or if anybody can do it, I can do it. These are helpful thoughts, even if they're not true. So what do I mean by this?
I love it.
My proportions, they don't lend themselves to being able to squat really well because of the way that my body is built. This is not something I can change. But
You sure you don't want to like break your legs and get leg extensions or whatever?
Imagine.
BBL?
But the thing is that if I start thinking about that every time I go squat, for example, I mean, how is that going to help me? It's not. But if I believe, conversely, that I can squat as heavy as the person who squatted the heaviest weight can, well, that's going to be more helpful. Why? Because it's going to help me continue to take the actions to reach whatever my potential and limit is. And that's, at the end of the day, like, isn't that what you want? To reach your potential, to reach your limit?
Right. So believing things for the sake of believing them, even if they're not necessarily true. Being slightly delusional, I think,
Slightly
is big.
delusional is a good thing.
Yeah.
You don't want to be naive.
Yes.
Understand that there are certain limitations to things. If you're, if your father gives you a small loan of $1 million, you might be in a better position than somebody who lives in the slums of Brazil. It's just how it works. But if you're that kid in the slums of Brazil who's still thinking to himself, I can create $1 billion business, you're going to be better off than everybody else who thinks, oh, shucks, I can barely have a meal today, and I'm never going to go anywhere with my life.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think being slightly delusional is a good thing.
I agree. And there's a quote from Sam Altman, who's the founder of OpenAI, which is the creator of ChatGPT, and he basically says some of the most successful people he's ever met were like probably actually more than slightly delusional. They were like moderate to severely delusional about just achieving what they could achieve. I think Elon Musk, I would highly recommend reading his biography by Walter Isaacson. He is fucking delusional. Like, he believes that he can accomplish things in time frames, particularly, that other people look at him and say, you're crazy, we literally cannot do that. And he's like, yes, we can. I am slightly delusional. I believe I can do it. And he ends up bending reality to his desires. This was also true with Steve Jobs. There was a phrase that I think some people who were early at Apple invented called, they said that Steve Jobs had a reality distortion field where he would gather his people and say, we are going to do X, Y, Z in terms of creating the next Apple computer, etc. They would say, we can't do that. That's not something that's possible, either technically not possible, or at least it's not possible in the time frame in which you're asking it. He would say, yes, it is. We are going to do it. And it happened the way he said. Just a force of will to lean in and say, and be delusional. It's like, I don't care. This is how we're doing it. Most people can't do that. Most people don't do that. So I love that mind frame. And then another one is, I love what you said about the small loan of $1 million reference, and then who could we be referring to there? And then the kid in the slums in Brazil. Arnold has a quote where he talks about most people assume that the top of the ladder is so competitive and there's so many people vying for that they assume that it is too difficult to get there, and so therefore they aim for the middle or even the bottom of the ladder. They automatically assume that it's too hard. But actually, the more people that assume that, the fewer people are aiming for the top of the ladder, and therefore the emptier it is. And so aim for the top. Aim for extremely high levels of wealth, fame if you want that, power, whatever it is you're aiming for. The best version of yourself, aim for that, because it's actually emptier there, because most people discourage themselves right off the bat. So it just, again, lends itself to being a little delusional, and then having that self-belief to actually aim for that.
Yeah,
So.
I think Mark Manson in The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck.
Another goat,
He
another one
talks
of my
about
idols.
he talks about that exact idea, in terms of a lot of people are not going to shoot for the stars, so you have less competition there.
Yeah.
So shoot for the stars
Yeah.
anyway. And just to the point of what we were talking about in terms of this, that being delusional is a good thing. I think the question to ask is, how can I do this? And that's going to drive you towards the direction that you need to go to. it starts with that delusional idea. Ask yourself how I can do this, and then take it from there.
I love that. That's big too, like asking yourself questions. And then I know you're big on this, and this is why I love you. One of the many reasons I love you. You do your homework. You take the time. Like the both of us are reading a book now by Dr. Peter Attia called Outlive. It's about, he's one of the world experts on longevity. Fucking how many pages of notes have you written? Like, you do your homework, whether it's reading books or studying a concept, or more to the point, trying to figure out what you're trying to do in life and in business. You do your homework. You sit down, you ask yourself these questions. I feel like you write out the answers. Most people don't do that, and then they wonder why they aren't where they are in life. Tim Ferriss is also big on this. Sitting down, writing down, what am I trying to do in my life, asking yourself certain questions and answering them. It sounds so simple, but most people don't do it. And then weeks and months and years go by, which I understand. Life is chaotic and complicated, and there's never been more distractions in our world than there are now. But years go by, and they never get to these pretty fundamental questions of, what am I trying to accomplish? Who am I trying to be? How am I going to do that? And you get there by asking yourself those questions and answering them. Most people don't do it. You do it. I think that's why you have different results than most people.
I appreciate that. It's so important to have direction. And part of that has to do with my upbringing, my parents. They always pushed me to be better. And in a gentle way, in a forgiving way, because there were times in my life, in middle school. So I went to this middle school, and it was like one of those you had to take a test to get into and whatever. And it actually used to be called the Gifted and Talented program, which when you're 11 years old, that's not really a good thing to think of yourself as gifted and talented, because what is that going to do? It's automatically going to make you believe that you don't have to work as hard.
Right.
So for a very long period of time, I was the lazy guy. I wasn't the guy who did his homework. Literally, like one semester in middle school, I literally failed 7 out of 8 classes. Bro, I failed computers and gym.
That's crazy.
I literally only
failing
passed social
gym is
studies.
crazy.
I swear to God. I had to go to the principal's office with my dad, and my dad bribed her with some baklava, and we were good. But anyway, so
did you go to middle school in Queens?
I did.
That's the most Queens thing I've ever heard.
Yeah.
Bribing it with baklava is great.
Yeah, and that principal, she actually got caught for taking bribes. So forever thankful for her. But anyway,
shout out.
So.
Must have been some fire baklava. Failed 7 classes.
Yeah. But yeah, so what I'm trying to say is, the whole quote of what is it? When talent doesn't work.
Hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. Yeah.
Exactly. And so I realized very quickly that I needed to work hard if I needed to be where I wanted to be. And actually, it was exercise and my CrossFit journey that made me realize that you have to put in the work. There's no other way to get better than putting in the work.
Right.
Because if you just rest on your laurels, if you just think, oh, I'm going to crush this, and you don't do all of the little things that make up success in the whole big picture, I mean, you're not going to reach the standards that you set for yourself if your standards are high.
Mm-hmm. I wanna wrap up by asking you, what would be your advice to someone who is either early in their entrepreneurial journey or wants to be an entrepreneur for a lot of the reasons we've been talking about to achieve that financial freedom, time freedom, etc., but they don't know where to start, etc. What would be your advice to that person? And it can be sort of a more higher arching motivational thing, or maybe even like a super practical thing. What's the first thing that comes to your mind?
Be willing to change who you are in the service of where you want to become. So one of the books that we've talked about before was this book called Not Nice by Dr.
Oh my God.
Zazapura.
You recommended that to me. Love that book. Big time book.
One of the things that's great about that book is that it helped me remove the limiting beliefs that it wasn't okay to ask certain questions or it wasn't okay to have certain conversations. And when you're in a position where you're an entrepreneur, you have to like sell your product. You have to have difficult conversations about expectations, about certain things. Maybe there's a client and there's a little bit of discord. You have to be able to have that conversation. But if you're not the person who can have that conversation because you don't know how to manage your emotions, or you don't know how to stay respectful as you're having a conversation, or you have other things that you're worried about, you're only going to go so far. So my number one piece of advice would be willing to change who you are for who you want to become. And the second piece of advice would be to learn as much as possible. And my third piece of advice would be to get a mentor, at least in the beginning, to get an understanding of where you're at. To get an understanding of what people who have succeeded in what you want to do have done, so that you just have like a nice track to run on.
How can someone get a mentor in your experience? How can someone do that?
So it's a bit of a trial and error thing in terms of how to get the best mentor for you. Luckily growing up, I had family members who acted as mentors. And then when I started paying for my mentors to learn how to be the best personal trainer, gym owner I could be, it was a bit of a trial and error experience where, I actually worked with Alex Hormozy for a little bit. That's a whole nother story. But I worked with him for a bit. It ended up being like really bad for my business actually. So that was but I still love him. And then I did like 2 other programs until I landed on the mentors that I've been working with now for 3 years.
Gotcha. Amazing. Yeah, so big trial and error process. Yeah. I'm trying to think for me, like the advice I would give to an entrepreneur. I think I have a few. I think one is a lot of people don't know where to start. And what has worked for me is start where you are. So for me, I was working the first sort of big boy job I got, the first job that actually paid me enough money where I could actually like live and put food on the table and not just be leeching off my parents, was as a marketing, doing marketing for a dermatology clinic. And I immediately accepted that job right away, even though I had no prior experience in medicine and quite frankly, very little experience in marketing at the time. Absolutely exaggerated on my resume, my experience in marketing.
But I love that you did that. You went with it anyway.
100%. And because I knew, like you said, this is going to be a learning experience. I'm going to dive in and I'm going to learn. And so what I realized after a year was doing that job, and I also was working for a YouTuber doing content marketing. I didn't do research or try to reach out in some totally unrelated business and start that. I said, well, I already understand a little bit of marketing, and I understand a little bit of the dermatology niche, how the business runs, what their problems are, what goes well for them that maybe doesn't go well for other businesses. And I left and I started this marketing agency. It originally was just going to be in dermatology plastic surgery. And now I got a second client who's a home care agency. So now it's really, I'm going to try to keep it in medical in general. But it was starting exactly where I was. Starting a business based on where I was, who I was with, and the skills that I currently had. And that would be my recommendation for probably most people, unless you or don't really have any skills and you kind of have to reach out, or B, you really don't like where you are and you just absolutely couldn't see yourself starting a business. And that, okay, I understand, but my recommendation would be start where you are, try to start something there, try to make $1 doing something there. Maybe you do it for a year, you learn a bunch of stuff, and maybe you end up doing something else. Maybe you end up doing it for 5 years, making good money, and then you go do something else that you are then reaching out to. But again, I would recommend starting where you are.
That's great advice, bro.
Yeah. And then I'm trying to think, because I love my motivational mindset stuff.
Give it to us.
Man, I mean, I could go for literally years about that stuff, but I think it would be, okay. My number one thing is actually from Hormozy, which I got this from him. Think in decades, not in days. That quote alone has saved me, helped me so many times where I'm struggling with something or it's like day 5 in a row of working 10-hour days. Think in decades, not in days. Humans are not designed to think in long-term time horizons. We're designed to think in like, when's my next meal coming? Where am I going to get shelter? Because evolutionarily, that was our environment. Now the game is actually completely flipped. The winners are those who can think in decades, not in days. And so if you can plan your life, I'm talking being specific. I have a 5-year plan written out. I actually have like a much more general, like 50-year plan written out. Like what I want to do over the next 10, 15 years, business, parlay that into an audience, kind of what I'm doing here. And maybe I even mentioned to you off air, this is a newer idea, maybe even parlay that into some sort of political influence down the line. One leads into the next. Again, kind of like my one of my idols, Arnold. But thinking in decades, not in days, because if you are getting too zoomed in and too focused on the day-to-day difficulties of a business, of things outside the business, of a relationship, of, oh, I didn't have a good day or a good week this week, you will not make it. You will get too stressed out because you're too zoomed in. Zoom out, realize it is a marathon, not a sprint, and that the days and weeks and years that go by are actually very small percentages of the whole game, especially if you're younger, in the game. So be patient and think in decades, not in days. It'll work out. So there you go. Boom. My boy, this was an absolute pleasure. First of many episodes with you.
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching the Standing on Business podcast, episode 4. Like, follow, subscribe. Do you have anything you want to plug? A website, people to follow you?
You can follow me at Ahmed Trainer. So that's AHMED, and then again AHMED Trainer. My website is lotusfitnessny.com, and that's pretty much it.
Boom. My boy, it was a pleasure.
Thank you, brother.
Love you. Thanks for watching.